Hi, I'm Ella. Not much to tell, really. I grew up in a little house on the edge of town, the kind where everybody knows your name and your business. I've been slinging beers and burgers at Joe's Bar and Grill since I finished high school. It's honest work, and it pays the bills. One busy Thursday night, he walked in. Michael. I didn't know it then, but he was gonna turn my world upside down. He settled into one of my tables, with the kind of smile that's too smooth. Handsome? Sure. But it was more than that. He had a way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room. Evening, I greeted, pad in hand, ready for his order. What can I get you? A beer, whatever's on tap, and your name? He asked with a grin that felt a bit rehearsed. Ella. And the beer's coming right up, I replied, trying not to roll my eyes. I've seen his type before, charming until they get what they want. Ella, he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Nice to meet you. I'm Michael. I nodded, jotting down his order, before making my way to the bar. I figured that was the end of it. Serve him his beer, maybe make a bit of small talk, and move on to the next customer. But Michael wasn't a one-drink kind of man, nor was he here just for the booze. Every time I passed by, he had a question. Where was I from? What did I like to do for fun? Casual stuff, but his interest seemed genuine. He laughed easily, listened closely, and somehow, 1 hour turned into 3. By the time his friends showed up, I felt like I'd known him for years. His friends were a rowdy bunch, clearly from the same polished world as him. They joked about golf trips and ski resorts, worlds away from my quiet, simple life. Yet, Michael didn't talk about that stuff. He kept the conversation on common ground, movies, music, the local football team. Michael came back the next day. And the next. Each evening, spending a few hours at my table, talking about nothing and everything. His persistence was something else. He didn't put on airs or try to impress me with his money or who his dad was. Heck, he didn't even bring it up until I asked why he didn't seem to work the usual 9 to 5. My dad's a big shot in the state office, he admitted, but shrugged like it was no big deal. Means I got the freedom to live a bit differently, that's all. And here you are, spending your evenings in a bar with me, I pointed out. Best part of my day, he said earnestly. After a few weeks of this routine, he finally asked me out properly. No more beating around the bush. I figured, why not? Maybe it was time to take a chance on something, or someone, unexpected. After Michael and I had been seeing each other for a while, he decided it was time I met his parents. I wasn't exactly jumping at the idea, you know? I mean, his folks lived in one of those giant houses that look like they're straight out of a magazine, more like a museum than a home. But Michael was insistent. Said it was important to him. So, I agreed. The day came, and there I was, standing at the doorstep of this huge place, feeling like I'd stepped into another world. Michael rang the bell, and his mother opened the door. First thing I noticed was her look, kinda like she'd just smelled something bad. Michael, darling. She air-kissed him, then turned her eyes on me. And you must be Ella. Nice to meet you, ma'am, I said, extending my hand like I was taught manners too. She barely touched it, like she was afraid I'd rub off on her or something. Yes, well, come in. We stepped into their foyer, yeah, they had a foyer, and she led us through to the living room where his dad was waiting. Mr. Winters was a big guy, with a loud voice and a firm handshake that about crushed my fingers. Ella, heard a lot about you. All good, he boomed, making me feel a tad more welcome than Mrs. Winters had. Thank you, sir. It's nice to finally meet you, I managed to say. We all sat down, and that's when the real fun began. Mrs. Winters was all about the subtle digs. So, Ella, Michael tells us you work at Joe's Bar? Must be quite an environment. Yeah, it's great. I meet all sorts of interesting people, I said, trying to keep it friendly. And your family? From around here? Other side of town, I replied. My dad fixes cars, and my mom's a secretary at the school. I see, she said, that one eyebrow arched like she'd figured out all she needed. Mr. Winters jumped in, maybe sensing the tension. That's what's great about this country, right? Anyone can make it if they try. Ella's a fine example, isn't she? I appreciated his effort, but it felt like he was talking about some kind of experiment, not a person. Dinner was served, and it was some fancy stuff that I couldn't even pronounce. We made small talk. Well, Michael and his dad did most of it. Mrs. Winters kept watching me like a hawk, especially when I struggled with the proper fork to use for the salad or whatever. Then out of nowhere, she dropped the bomb. Michael, darling, we really should consider your future. Marriage is not a decision to be taken lightly. Ella seems like a lovely girl, but you must think about compatibility. I choked on my water. Marriage? We hadn't even talked about that yet. Michael's face turned red, and he glanced at me, mouth opening and closing like he was searching for something safe to say. I was about ready to excuse myself, maybe fake a sudden illness or something, when Mr. Winters spoke up. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. They're young. They've got time to figure things out, right, Ella? Right, Mr. George. We're just taking things one step at a time, I said, giving him a grateful look. The evening dragged on a bit more after that. Michael tried to smooth things over, talking up how well I was doing managing my finances and stuff, like he had to prove I wasn't just some gold digger. It was weird and uncomfortable, and by the time we left, I was exhausted. Despite the frosty dinner with his parents, and all the subtle jabs from his mom, we figured we'd give this marriage thing a shot. I wanted something small, maybe just close family and a few friends at a local church. But Michael's dad, Mr. Winters, had other plans. Big plans. A week after we got engaged, he called us into their living room, yeah, the museum one, and laid out his vision. Listen, this wedding isn't just a union of two hearts, okay? It's an opportunity, Mr. Winters started, spreading his arms like he was already addressing a crowd. We'll have the press, the state officials, it's gonna be grand. I looked at Michael, hoping he'd back me up. He cleared his throat. Dad, Ella's not comfortable with. Comfortable? She'll be more than comfortable. I'm talking about a top-tier event planner, designer dresses, gourmet food. It'll be spectacular. Mr. Winters wasn't just planning a wedding, he was orchestrating a gala. The discussion, or monologue, really, went on for hours. By the end, I felt steamrolled into agreeing. It wasn't just our wedding anymore, it was a political campaign event. The big day came faster than a freight train, and it was everything Mr. Winters had promised and more. The venue was a massive estate with gardens that looked like they were maintained by an army of landscapers. There were flowers everywhere, musicians, and yeah, a sea of guests I'd never seen before in my life. Most of them seemed to know more about Michael's political family background than about us as a couple. The ceremony itself was a blur. I walked down the aisle, feeling every eye on me, not with warmth, but with curiosity and scrutiny. When I reached Michael, he gave me a reassuring grin. "You okay?" he whispered as we stood before the officiant. "Yeah, just feels like we're actors in some play," I whispered back. "Let's just get through this," he said, squeezing my hand. The reception was no less extravagant. Mr. Winters made sure to give a speech, mentioning how his son had married a wonderful, simple girl from our very own town, proving that our family values real, hard-working Americans. I plastered a smile on my face, clapping along with everyone else, feeling like a prop in his political theater. Later, as we mingled among the guests, I overheard snippets of conversation. Great for his image, such a smart move before the election. It was clear this wedding was less about us and more about them. After the whirlwind of the wedding, Michael and I moved into the plush apartment his parents gave us as a wedding gift. It was fancier than anything I'd ever lived in, all sleek surfaces and designer furniture. It should have felt like a dream, but mostly, it just felt cold. Michael spent his days how he always did, out with friends, coming back late, sometimes not until the next morning. I tried to make the apartment feel like home, filling it with photos and little touches that reminded me of my old life. But every time Michael's mom, Mrs. Winters, came over, she'd have something to say about my choices. One afternoon, she dropped by unannounced, just as I was setting up some new curtains I bought. "Ella, really, those are what you chose? They're quite quaint," she said, her nose wrinkling like she smelled something bad. "I like them. They remind me of home," I said, trying not to let her get to me. Well, it's your home too, I suppose. But remember, you're not just anyone now, you're a Winters. You have to think about appearances," she advised, her voice dripping with that condescending tone I'd come to dread. I bit my tongue, nodding silently. The conversation moved from the curtains to Michael's habits. "I hear he's been spending a lot of time at the club again. You really should keep a better eye on him, Ella. It's not becoming for a man of his position to be seen gallivanting about at all hours." "I'm not his keeper, Mrs. Winters. He's a grown man, he makes his own choices," I shot back, a little sharper than I intended. She'd sked, shaking her head. "You might think that, dear, but part of being a good wife is guiding your husband. Steering him away from temptations." The implication was clear, and it stung. Was she saying it was my fault Michael was acting this way? That night, when Michael stumbled in past midnight, I confronted him. "Your mom thinks I should be keeping you on a shorter leash, that it's my job to fix you," I said, frustration boiling over. Michael, half-drunk and bleary-eyed, just laughed. "Oh, come on, Ella. You know how she is. Just ignore her." "But I can't, Michael. This is our life, and it's falling apart. You're out all the time, and when you are home, you're like this." I gestured at him, my heart sinking as his laughter died down. He rubbed his face, looking tired. "Ella, I'm just trying to have a bit of fun. We're young, aren't we supposed to enjoy ourselves? It's not fun for me, watching you throw your life away, watching us become strangers," I admitted, the hurt clear in my voice. Michael's expression softened, and he took a step toward me. "I'm sorry, babe. I didn't realize you felt that way. I'll try to do better, okay? Just give me some time." I wanted to believe him, really, I did. But as the days turned into weeks, nothing changed. He made promises during the day and broke them at night. And Mrs. Winters' visits became more frequent, each one a reminder of how I was failing to live up to her expectations. One particularly rough day, I was back at Joe's Bar and Grill, picking up some shifts because, well, Michael's idea of budgeting was blowing through whatever cash his parents handed him. It was mid-shift, the bar bustling with the usual crowd, when in walked Mrs. Winters with a gaggle of her high society friends. The moment I saw her, my stomach knotted. She caught my eye, a smug look crossing her face, as if she'd just stepped into her own personal comedy show. They seated themselves in my section, of course. As I approached with a forced smile, Mrs. Winters waved me over with an impatient flick of her wrist. "Ella, dear, we're ready to order. Don't dawdle, we have an engagement afterward," she said loudly, probably for the benefit of her friends who were already snickering into their menus. I nodded, taking out my notepad. "What can I get you ladies?" The orders were rattled off with a few unnecessary comments about the menu's simplicity, which I ignored. As they spoke, Mrs. Winters leaned in towards her friends, whispering loud enough for me to catch bits about my poor son and Ella's little job. It made my cheeks burn, serving them, knowing they were mocking me. After placing their order at the bar, I overheard more of their chatter. "And can you believe it? She convinces Michael to spend all his money on drinks. It's like she's running him into the ground on purpose," Mrs. Winters said, her voice dripping with fake concern. I clenched my fists, counted to 10, and returned to their table with a tray of drinks. "Here you go, ladies. Anything else I can get you right now?" Mrs. Winters looked me up and down. "No, just try to be quick with the food, won't you? We wouldn't want to be late." The rest of their stay was a blur of backhanded compliments and rushed requests. By the time they left, I was seething, but had to shake it off and finish my shift. Back at home, the tension didn't let up. Mr. Winters was ramping up for the final stretch of his campaign, which meant more events, more smiling, and more pretending. At each event, he paraded me around like a trophy. "Here's my wonderful daughter-in-law, Ella." A true example of our family's commitment to real people. Every compliment felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Smiling through these gatherings was getting harder, especially when all I wanted was to run out the door and never look back. One evening, I came home from a late shift to find Michael sitting in the dark, his face buried in his hands. He looked up as I entered, and I could tell something was terribly wrong. His eyes were red, and he seemed to have aged years in just a few hours. "Ella, I'm in trouble," he started, his voice shaky. "Big trouble." I dropped my bag and sat down beside him. "What's going on, Michael?" He took a deep breath, and then it all came pouring out. "I've been gambling. It got out of hand, and now I owe a lot of money. I mean, a lot. To some really bad people." My stomach turned. "How much are we talking about?" "More than we can afford. A lot more. More than $100,000. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt a cold fear grip me. "Michael, what did you do?" He broke down, sobbing. "I thought I could win it back, fix it before anyone noticed. But I just dug deeper. They're threatening me now, Ella. They say if I don't pay up soon." He couldn't finish the sentence. Seeing him so vulnerable, so desperate, I felt my anger give way to a protective urge. Okay, let's think. We could tell your parents." "No, we can't tell them," he grabbed my hand. "Please, Ella, help me. I swear I'll fix this. I'll be better. I'll be the husband you deserve. Just help me get through this." I took out a loan the next day, under my name, because his credit was a mess. Handing over that money to him was the hardest thing I'd ever done. He promised again to change, and for a while, it seemed like he actually might. Michael started coming home earlier, helping around the apartment, even doing dishes and laundry without me having to ask. We spent evenings together like a real couple, talking about our day, planning for a future that suddenly seemed possible. I started to let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could turn this around. 6 months later, I came home after another long night at work, the smell of the bar still clinging to my clothes. As I opened the door to our bedroom, the sight before me froze me in place. There was Michael, passed out drunk on our bed, with not one, but 2 blondes asleep next to him. Bottles and clothes were scattered everywhere. It was like a slap in the face, all the more painful, because I had started to trust him again. Rage and betrayal churned inside me. I grabbed my phone and started recording. I needed evidence, not just for myself, but for any legal battles that might come. I shook him awake, my voice ice cold. "Michael, who the hell are these girls?" He blinked at me, confused and still half drunk. "What? Oh, they're just friends. We were just having some fun." "Friends? This is fun?" I was almost screaming now, the phone still recording. "In our bed?" He tried to wave it off, mumbling. "Come on, Ella, it's not a big deal. We're just messing around." That was it. I'd had enough. I left the room and called his father, Mr. Winters. When he answered, I was blunt. "Your son has crossed the line, Mr. Winters. I just found him in bed with other women. I've recorded everything, and I'm filing for divorce." No sooner had I finished the call with Mr. Winters, my father-in-law, than he was at our apartment, his face a storm of anger and worry. He burst through the door like a hurricane, zeroing in on Michael, who looked like he hadn't slept at all. "What the hell were you thinking, Michael?" Mr. Winters roared as soon as he laid eyes on his son. The walls might as well have shaken from his fury. "Dad, Michael started, but Mr. Winters cut him off. "No, I don't want to hear your excuses. You've gone too far this time. Your reckless behavior is not only destroying your marriage, it's threatening everything I've worked for." His voice filled the room, and I could tell this was about more than just family. It was about his career, his image, all of it hanging by a thread. Turning his gaze to me, Mr. Winters's tone softened, but the urgency in his voice remained. Ella, I'm deeply sorry for all this. I know an apology can't undo the hurt, but I'm prepared to make things right. He proceeded to lay out his plan. I'm going to sell this apartment and give you the money from the sale as compensation. It's the least I can do. In return, I need you to keep this quiet, especially from the press. I nodded, still in shock, barely processing the speed at which things were moving. Okay, I understand. And the divorce? Keep that quiet too. Especially from my wife, you know how she is with gossip, he added, almost pleadingly. I won't say a word, I assured him, feeling the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about me and Michael anymore, it was about keeping up appearances, at least for now. Good. And Michael, he turned back to his son, who had been silently listening. You're going to take a trip. A long one. Consider it a business trip. Clear your head and stay out of the public eye. Michael looked defeated, nodding slowly without a word. It was clear he had no fight left in him, crushed under the dual weight of his father's authority and his own guilt. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, quiet conversations, and discreet moves. The apartment sold quickly, and true to his word, Mr. Winters handed over $600,000 to me. He also settled the loan I had taken out to bail Michael out, clearing all my financial ties to him. With the money, I made a fresh start. I moved to another city, far enough to feel like a clean slate but not so far that I felt lost. I bought a small, cozy apartment in a leafy neighborhood, a place that felt like it could be a true home. And I got myself a new car, nothing fancy, but something that symbolized my new independence. As I settled into my new life, I took one more crucial step. I blocked every number associated with the Winters. It was the final cord cut, the last goodbye to a chapter of my life that I needed to close for good. I settled into my job as an administrator at a cozy downtown restaurant, where the pace was steady but nothing like the frenetic energy of Joe's Bar and Grill. It gave me a sense of stability and routine, something I hadn't really had back then. It was exactly 2 years to the day since I'd left when my past decided to make an unexpected reappearance. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Ella, you need to keep better tabs on your husband. The voice was shrill, unmistakable even after all this time. Mrs. Winters. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, taken aback by her tone. Excuse me? Michael is in trouble, and it's all because you can't seem to do your job as a wife, she accused, her voice frantic. I took a deep breath, the shock fading quickly into annoyance. Mrs. Winters, what are you talking about? Slow down. She huffed into the phone. One of Michael's friends called me. He's gotten himself into a mess, hit a policeman, if you can believe it. They needed money to keep it quiet, so I sent it. Now, why weren't you watching him? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Mrs. Winters, Michael and I are divorced. Have been for 2 years now. I have no idea what he's been up to, nor is it my concern. There was a pause, and then, divorced? Why doesn't anyone tell me anything? Maybe because it's none of your business, I said, my patience wearing thin. And as for the money, Mrs. Winters, it sounds like you've been scammed. Michael hitting a policeman and needing money sent in a hurry? Doesn't that sound strange to you? She started to sob, her cries piercing even through the phone. What am I going to do? I took the money from George's savings to pay them off. He will be furious if he finds out about the money. That's something you'll have to sort out with him, I said, my tone firm. I really am sorry you're in this situation, but there's nothing I can do to help you. But Ella, I hope you figure things out, Mrs. Winters. Goodbye. I hung up before she could say anything else, blocking the number immediately after. Leaning back in my chair, I let out a long breath. The call had shaken me, bringing back a flood of memories I'd rather forget. It made me realize just how far I'd come from the chaos of my life with Michael and his family. Here I was, in a home I loved, a job that fulfilled me, far from the manipulations and drama of the Winters. I got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and I felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely detached from that old life. I was free, truly free, and as I turned back from the window to go about the rest of my day, I felt a smile spread across my face.